That was a great introduction, Gary. Thank you. We're going to do two negotiations. One where Eric represents beginning writers, such as you folks in the room who are starting off, and I'm going to represent, or I'm going to pretend I'm the what's called the business affairs person at the studio. This is the person who's employed by the studio to negotiate on the studio's behalf with whatever piece of talent the studio wants to make a deal with. In this case, you, the writer. And then we're going to switch roles, and I'm going to represent a very experienced writer who also wants to start directing his own work, and Eric will represent the studio executive.
I need a volunteer, but it won't be very painful.
Okay.
What's your name?
Sherry Moore.
And you've been recommended to me as a client by Gary, so I'm going to be your attorney.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you a chance to decide. That's it.
Oh, okay, thanks.
You can hire me on a time basis where it would require a retainer, or you can pay me 5% of what you make. So if you make nothing, I make nothing. If you make a lot, I make a lot. Which would you prefer?
5%.
I was afraid of that. Now, have you won many Academy Awards yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. And your script, is it a comedy?
It's a fantasy. But it's a superhero. It's original. I've got a trilogy. All the way through the trilogy, I have 6 characters.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, as I understand, your studio wants to make a deal with my client. You want to have lunch or dinner, or come to my office, or come to your office?
Most of the time, these things are done on the telephone. It's very rare that I was business affairs and legal affairs at Warner Brothers Television for many years, and I can literally count on the fingers of one hand the number of times I actually met with the person that I was negotiating with on the other side of the proverbial table.
I understand you want to hire my client. You have a budget in mind for your picture?
As little as possible. The studio wants to option your client's script. It doesn't necessarily at this point want to purchase it. We're probably going to ask you for 6 or 7 free rewrites before we actually exercise the option and purchase the script. Let me explain what I just said. The studios are notorious for trying to get as much out of the writer as possible for as little money as possible. So that technically or formally speaking, the Writers Guild requires that if the writer is asked to do a rewrite or a polish, that the writer is paid. But there's a lot of winking and nodding going on in Hollywood between the agents and the lawyers and the studio executives as to what actually gets compensated and what doesn't. Formally, the way this starts off is that the studio will pay 5% of the purchase price for every 6 months is the Writers Guild rule.
10%.
10% for every 6 months is the Writers Guild rule. And we kind of work up from there. And the purchase price is almost always Writers Guild minimum or Writers Guild minimum plus 5% or Writers Guild minimum plus 10%. So that the theory is that if the writer has to pay his or her lawyer 5%, and if the writer also has an agent, the writer has to pay the agent 10%, so that the writer is made whole and receives at least the Writers Guild minimum compensation.
When I said 10%, it certainly was not talking about the Writers Guild minimum. I'm talking what I would like to get.
I understand. Hopefully you understood that as well.
And the other thing, one reason that writers don't mind rewriting is they want to protect their credit. So they want to write as much as possible before somebody else comes in to rewrite it, because it's very important to get sole credit.
You understand that in addition to the basic minimum compensation set forth in the Guild for a original screenplay or an adapted screenplay. There's two different numbers for that. Writers get paid additional monies based on what credit they get. If they get the gold ring, that's the written by credit, and no other writer gets credited, then all of the bonuses and royalties and residuals that get paid to the writer will get paid 100% to the sole writer who got the sole credit. If, on the other hand, the writer has to share credit with one or more other writers, then that compensation is reduced by half or even by more than half sometimes.
And I was just talking to Paul. The Writers Guild determines who is entitled to credit. That's one of the great functions that they perform. And the studio puts out a tentative notice of credits, and then the Guild disseminates that to the writers, and then each writer who doesn't like it, who don't get its share, puts out their own argument with their lawyer's help or somebody else's help, showing why they deserve full credit, why they created most of the scenes, most of the characters, and so on. But I had an interesting experience. I had a writer who wrote Turbulence. It was his second script. I sold it for $1 million, which was quite unusual. The movie didn't make money, but the Guild decided that credit should be shared by him and a very famous other writer. And I asked whether he objected to that, and he said no, because he was thrilled to share credit with such a famous writer. A third writer complained, and there was an arbitration. My writer didn't even put in any kind of an argument on his behalf, and the Guild decided that my writer should get sole credit, which meant he got the sole residuals, which was wonderful. I had a wonderful experience because he was so thrilled about the deal. He invited me to dinner, cooked a duck, and gave me a $50,000 check. And the duck was pretty good too.